Sleep well, sweetie, my daughter-in-law said softly as she closed my bedroom door and locked it from the outside. Through the window, I watched them walk around the house, pouring gasoline like they were watering a garden. My son struck a match and smiled. Their plan was simple: kill me and take my $3 billion. Except when they came home from their little alibi dinner, they didn't walk into a burned ruin. They walked into me sitting comfortably in the living room right between the fire marshal and a detective. Before I tell you how that moment unfolded, tell me where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments, tap like and hit subscribe. Now let me take you back 6 hours. To the moment I discovered my own family thought I was worth more dead than alive. And how spectacularly wrong they were. 6 hours earlier I lay in my hospital bed, pretending to be heavily sedated while my son Michael and his wife Lauren whispered their murder plans just 3 feet away. They assumed that because I'm 72 and worth billions, my hearing must be failing. It isn't, my memory isn't either. The pills aren't working fast enough, Lauren hissed. At this rate she could live another 10 years, Michael shifted. We can't rush it. There's security footage. Nurses check on her every hour, then we do it at home, she snapped. Tonight. Make it look like an accident. My pulse hammered, but I kept my breathing perfectly steady. These 2 vultures had been feeding me increasing doses of digitalis for months, disguised as heart medication. They thought I was confused, slipping into dementia. What I actually was furious. I built Pinnacle Technologies in my garage in 1987. By 2010, we were valued at $50 billion. I sold for $3 billion and kept enough shares to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Michael? Lazy, entitled, waiting for inheritance like it was a paycheck. Lauren? Worse, a former pharmaceutical rep who knew exactly which drugs could mimic cognitive decline. Fire would be perfect, she murmured. Old house, faulty wiring. She's been forgetting to turn off appliances. Actually, Lauren, I'd been documenting every one of your poisoning attempts, but thank you for the character review. That evening's drive home felt surreal. Michael guided me to my bedroom with such gentle concern you'd never guess. He was planning to kill me. Lauren brought me tea, no doubt laced with more digitalis, and kissed my forehead like a devoted daughter. We're going to dinner, Grandma Kate, she said sweetly. Reservations at 7:30. Jeps was 45 minutes away. Their alibi: the second their car disappeared, I sprang into action. First call, this is Catherine Matthews. I need fire and police at my residence immediately. Code 7, family threat. Imminent danger. Next, I gathered evidence: the fake medication bottles, the financial documents revealing Michael's $2 million gambling debt, and the insurance policy they'd taken out on me just 6 months ago with them as beneficiaries. 40 minutes later, I heard footsteps on the porch. The smell hit them first, gasoline everywhere. Then they saw the smoke detectors Michael had disabled blinking again. I'd reconnected everyone. They opened the door expecting to find a corpse. Instead, they found me alive and perfectly calm in my favorite armchair, with Fire Marshal Robert Chen and Detective Sandra Mills standing beside me. Grandma Kate, Michael gasped, his face twisting between relief and terror. Thank God you're safe. We smelled smoke from the street. How thoughtful, I said. Especially since you're the ones who started it. The silence that followed was delicious. Nothing is sweeter than watching someone realize they've stepped directly into the trap they set for you. Lauren, recovered first, sociopaths always do. Kate, sweetie, you're confused. We just got back from dinner. Look, we have the receipt. Her hands trembled as she dug through her purse. Fire Marshal Chen stepped forward. Ma'am, we found accelerant poured around the entire perimeter of the house. The burn pattern indicates the intent was to trap someone inside. His voice was calm, but his eyes were stone. Michael went pale. That's impossible. Who would do something like that? Detective Mills checked her notepad, and that's where things really began to unravel. According to Mrs. Matthews, she saw 2 individuals outside her bedroom window at about 8:15 p.m. They appeared to be pouring liquid from red containers around the house's foundation. But we were at Jeps, Lauren insisted. The staff will remember us. I'm sure they will, I said pleasantly. Since you made such a point of being seen there, explain something to me. How did you manage to order dinner, drive 45 minutes home, attempt arson, and still have time to notice smoke from the street? You're either remarkably efficient criminals or terrible at math. Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Mom, you're not making sense. Why would we hurt you? $2 million in gambling debt might provide some motivation, Detective Mills said, pulling out Michael's financial records along with a recent $2 million life insurance policy he'd taken out on me. The color drained from Lauren's face. How did you get those records? She demanded. I finished her sentence for her. Darling, when you're worth $3 billion, You don't just assume your family loves you for your sparkling personality. I've had investigators monitoring both of you for months. Lauren's mask cracked completely. You paranoid old witch. You've been spying on your own family. Lucky for me, I replied. Since my family has been trying to murder me. Fire Marshal Chen raised an evidence bag containing an empty gasoline container. We found this in the bushes by your gate. Fresh fingerprints on the handle. Michael stared at it like it might attack him. Lauren, however, was calculating. I could see her scrambling for a new angle. This is all a misunderstanding, she said abruptly. Kate's been having episodes. Paranoid delusions. We've been trying to get her medical care, but she refuses treatment. Medical care like the digitalis you've been slipping into my tea? I asked casually. The room fell dead silent. Lauren's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with fury. Detective Mills leaned forward. Mom, are you saying you've been poisoned? Systematically, for approximately 4 months, I confirmed. I have hair samples, blood work, and video footage of Lauren adding medication to my food and drinks. Michael finally found his voice. Mom, that's insane. Lauren's been taking care of you. The medication is for your heart condition. What heart condition would that be, Michael? I've never had heart problems in my life. But digitalis poisoning mimics dementia beautifully, doesn't it, Lauren? Lauren's silence was the only answer we needed. Detective Mills stood. Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, I need you both to come with me for questioning. This is ridiculous. Michael protested. She's a senile old woman making up stories. I smiled, then my sweetest grandmother smile. Oh honey, there's nothing senile about $3 billion. And a very detailed will that, as of this morning, no longer includes either of you. The next morning, reporters swarmed my front lawn like vultures around roadkill. Billionaire tech pioneer survives murder plot. Family greed turns deadly. Silicon Valley grandmother outsmarts killers. I drank my coffee and watched the circus from my kitchen window. 30 years of fiercely guarded privacy gone overnight. But honestly, I'd rather be a living headline than a dead footnote. My attorney, James Harrison, arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. Looking like he'd aged 5 years since yesterday. Kate, this is a legal nightmare. The media attention alone could complicate everything. Good, I said, pouring him coffee in my favorite mug, the one that says world's most dangerous grandmother. I want Michael and Lauren to understand exactly what they've lost. The police are charging them with attempted murder, arson, and conspiracy. Lauren is also facing drug trafficking charges. The digitalis she used requires a prescription. She stole it from her old pharmaceutical contacts. I explained. My investigators traced the serial numbers. Very sloppy for someone who thought she was clever, James sighed. Kate, they're your son and daughter-in-law. Are you sure you want to go through with this? I set my mug down harder than necessary. James, they tried to burn me alive. They've been slowly poisoning me for months. Exactly how much loyalty do you think I owe people who see me as a walking dollar sign? I understand your anger, he said carefully, but think about the implications. Michael is your only child. Then maybe he should have thought about that before trying to kill his mother for money. My phone buzzed, a text from Detective Mills. Lab confirms digitalis in all food samples, video evidence admissible. Case is solid. James, I said, holding out the message for him to read. I didn't survive the tech industry by being sentimental. I survived by being smarter than the people trying to destroy me. There was a knock at the door. Through the window, I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, holding a casserole dish. Behind her stood 3 other neighbors, all wearing worried expressions and carrying food. Kate. Dear Mrs. Rodriguez said as I opened the door. We heard about the terrible incident. We brought food within minutes. My kitchen was full of neighbors I hadn't spoken to in more than 15 years. They'd all seen the news, of course, but more importantly, they'd all had their suspicions about Michael and Lauren. That boy never visited unless he needed something, said Mr. Patterson from 2 houses down. And that wife of his. He shook his head, always asking questions about your business, added Mrs. Chen. Last month she wanted to know if you'd mentioned updating your will. It was strange. Really, my neighbors had been watching my attempted murder unfold in real time. Recognizing warning signs I'd been too close to see clearly, Mrs. Matthews, said young Sarah next door. I recorded some of their arguments. They were loud enough to hear through the walls. Should I give the recordings to the police? 20 minutes later, Detective Mills arrived to collect what amounted to an entire neighborhood's worth of evidence against Michael and Lauren. Apparently, I wasn't the only one documenting their behavior. As the neighbors finally left with promises to check on me daily, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for surviving. I'd never doubted I would. But for discovering I wasn't as alone as I'd believed. My phone rang. James, calling from his office. Kate, I have news. Michael and Lauren's bail hearing is tomorrow. The prosecutor is asking for $2 million each. Perfect, I said. They don't have $2 million. That's why they tried to kill me in the first place, Kate. His voice carried a warning tone. James, I cut in, I want you to attend that hearing. I want you to look my son in the eye and tell him that his mother, the woman he tried to murder, hopes he enjoys his time in jail thinking about what family really means. The bail hearing was a masterclass in cosmic justice. I sat in the front row wearing my best navy suit and the pearl necklace Michael's father gave me on our anniversary. If he was going to see his mother possibly for the last time, I wanted him to remember exactly what he'd thrown away. Michael looked terrible. Orange jumpsuit, hollow eyes, hands trembling from what the jail doctor had identified as withdrawal. His gambling addiction had apparently expanded to cocaine. Lauren sat beside him, stripped of her usual polished exterior, and replaced with the reality of county detention center chic. The prosecutor, Patricia Valdez, a sharp, relentless woman, presented the case with surgical precision. Your Honor, these defendants systematically poisoned an elderly woman for 4 months, then attempted to burn her alive to cover their tracks and collect insurance money. Michael's public defender, a man who looked like he'd drawn the short straw that morning, tried a weak argument about family misunderstandings and stress-related poor judgment. Lauren's private attorney, very expensive and very desperate, attempted to portray her as a devoted daughter-in-law pushed to the brink by my supposed mental decline. Then Judge Patricia Williams asked the question I'd been waiting for. Mrs. Matthews, you're present in court today. Would you like to make a statement regarding bail? I stood slowly, leaning heavily on the cane I didn't actually need because a little drama never hurts. Your Honor, I began. I spent 40 years building a technology company from nothing. I employed 3,000 people, paid millions in taxes, and donated over $50 million to charities. I did this as a single mother after my husband died when Michael was 12. The courtroom fell silent except for the soft tapping of the court reporter's keys. I loved my son unconditionally. I paid for his education, his wedding, his house, his car. When he developed a gambling problem, I paid those debts too. Hoping he'd learn from his mistakes, I turned to Michael, who still couldn't meet my eyes. When he married Lauren, I welcomed her like the daughter I never had. I trusted her with my health, my home, my life. My voice hardened. They repaid that love by trying to murder me for money they were too lazy to earn. Your Honor, these people saw a 72-year-old woman and thought she'd be easy prey. They were wrong. I sat down to absolute silence. Judge Williams reviewed her notes for what felt like 10 minutes. Bail is set at $5 million each, she announced at last. These defendants attempted to murder a vulnerable elderly person for financial gain. They pose a clear danger to the victim and the community. $5 million. Even if they'd managed to steal my money, they couldn't have afforded that. As court security led them away, Lauren turned and mouthed something that looked very much like a threat. Michael, on the other hand, was crying. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like angry bees. Mrs. Matthews, how do you feel seeing your son arrested? Relieved, I said honestly. For months, I thought I was losing my mind. Turns out I was just being murdered. There's actually something comforting about knowing the difference. Will you visit them in jail? I paused, genuinely considering it. I spent 72 years being the kind of woman who forgave everything and forgot nothing. It nearly got me killed. I think it's time to try being the kind of woman who remembers everything and forgives nothing. That quote ended up on every evening newscast in the country, but the real satisfaction came 3 hours later when James called with an update. Kate, I have interesting news. Apparently, Michael's cellmate is a gentleman named Rodriguez who was convicted of killing his mother for insurance money. How poetic, I murmured. Rodriguez has already explained to Michael exactly what happens to people who murder their mothers. In very colorful terms, I'm told. I smiled for the first time in months. James, I think I'm going to sleep very well tonight. 2 weeks later, Terry stood in the empty shell of what used to be Michael's house, watching movers load my belongings into trucks. The bank had foreclosed when his gambling debts were exposed. Apparently, my son had been more creative with other people's money than I'd realized. Mrs. Matthews? The moving foreman approached hesitantly. We found this in a bedroom safe. He handed me a manila envelope labeled insurance policies. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold, not just the policy on my life, but additional policies on my property, my car, even my jewelry. Lauren had been extremely thorough, but there was something else, a handwritten letter and Michael's familiar scrawl. Lauren, I can't do this anymore. She's my mother. Find another way. Dated to days before their arrest. So, my son had grown a conscience at the last minute. How touching. Too bad it was about 4 months too late. My phone rang. Detective Mills, Mrs. Matthews, we've had a development. Lauren's agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Cooperate how? She's claiming Michael was the mastermind. Says she was coerced, afraid for her own safety if she didn't go along with his plan. I laughed a sharp, bitter sound. Of course she is. Lauren's always been smarter than Michael. She's probably figured out which one of them is more likely to get the death penalty. There's more. Mills continued. She's also claiming you've been mentally abusive for years. That Michael felt trapped by your financial control. Financial control? I could feel my blood pressure spiking. I paid for everything in their lives without asking for anything in return. Exactly what control was I exerting? According to her statement, you held money over their heads, threatened to cut them off whenever they disagreed with you, made them feel worthless. The audacity was staggering. Detective Mills. I have 30 years of bank records showing every gift, every payment, every bailout I provided to my son. Find me one instance where I demanded anything in return. That's actually why I'm calling. The prosecutor wants to meet with you. Lauren's defense strategy is shifting to paint you as a manipulative matriarch. Who drove your family to desperation? When? Tomorrow at 9 a.m. after hanging up, I stood in Michael's former house, surrounded by the remnants of his failed life, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Uncertainty. Not about my innocence, that was beyond question, but about whether a jury would see it the same way. How easy would it be to paint a wealthy, widowed mother as controlling? How simple to convince people that $3 billion came with strings attached? I walked through the master bedroom where Lauren had carefully planned my death. In the attached bathroom, I found the prescription bottles she must have missed when she fled. All heart medications. All with my name on them. And every single one labeled as containing digitalis. But here's what Lauren never understood about being a successful businesswoman. You always keep detailed records. Every transaction. Every conversation. Every decision. I pulled out my phone and called James. I need you to access my private files. Security code 7749. There's a folder marked family financial history. Bring everything to the prosecutor's office tomorrow. Kate, what exactly are we talking about here? 30 years of documentation showing every penny I ever gave Michael. Every conversation about money. Every time I bailed him out of trouble. If Lauren wants to play the victim, then let's show the jury exactly what kind of victim tries to burn her benefactor alive. How extensive are these records? I smiled, thinking back to decades in the tech industry where documentation can make or break a company. James, I didn't become a billionaire by trusting people's memories. I have everything. That night, I sat in my new temporary apartment, a downtown penthouse, with security that could rival the White House, and reviewed 30 years of being the mother I thought I was supposed to be. Bank statements showing Michael's college tuition, $180,000 his wedding, $75,000 3 cars, $95,000 credit card debt paid 5 separate times, $340,000 gambling debts, $2,100,000 total given to my son in his adult life, $2,190,000 total requests for repayment, 0 total expressions of gratitude. I'd need Lauren's cooperation to count that low. The prosecutor's office felt like a battleground, and I was ready for war. Patricia Valdez had spread my documentation across every available surface: bank statements, receipts, recorded phone calls, even photographs from family gatherings with timestamps showing Michael's various expensive gifts. Mrs. Matthews, she said, studying a particularly incriminating bank transfer, this is remarkable. You've documented every financial interaction with your son for 30 years. In my business, you learn people's memories become very selective when money is involved. I prefer facts to feelings. She picked up a recording device. And these phone conversations? I recorded all our discussions about money after his first gambling incident in 2019. Michael had a tendency to forget the terms of our agreements. We listened to several recordings. In one from just 6 months ago, Michael was practically weeping as he begged for help with a $400,000 debt owed to some very unfriendly people in Atlantic City. Mom, I'm dead if you don't help me. They're serious people. Michael, this is the 4th time you've said never again. What am I supposed to believe? I know. But I've learned my lesson. This is it, I swear. After this, I'm done. No more gambling, no more debts, no more asking you to clean up my messes. You said that last time. And the time before that. Mom, please. I'm your son. And then my own voice, tired and resigned. Transfer the money, James, all of it. Patricia paused the recording. You paid it. Every penny. As always. And here's Lauren's recorded statement from yesterday. She continued, pressing play on a new clip. Michael was under constant pressure from his mother. She used money to control every aspect of our lives. We felt like prisoners in our own home. The irony was staggering. A prisoner who drove a BMW I bought, lived in a house I paid for, and wore clothes I funded. This next recording is particularly interesting, Patricia said. It's from 3 weeks ago. Michael's voice filled the room again. Mom, I need to talk to you about something serious. Lauren thinks we think maybe it's time you considered assisted living. Assisted living? Michael, I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, but you've been forgetful. The bank called because you missed a payment on the charity fund. You never miss payments. Of course I had missed the payment. I was being slowly poisoned. My thinking was getting foggy. But Michael's voice on the recording, it held something I hadn't caught at the time. Satisfaction. Double quotes Mrs. Matthews, Patricia said gently. They weren't just trying to steal your money. They were systematically destroying your reputation and cognitive abilities. To make the theft look justified, the sophistication of their plan was actually impressive. In a cold, sociopathic way, create dementia symptoms through poisoning. Document my resulting confusion, build a case for incompetence, then remove the inconvenient witness. There's something else, Patricia continued. We found Lauren's computer. She'd been researching inheritance law, specifically how to accelerate the probate process for deceased persons with substantial assets. She handed me printouts of Lauren's search history. How long does probate take for murdered persons' inheritance rights when primary heir is in prison? Life insurance payouts in cases of natural disaster death. She was planning for multiple scenarios, and then I realized if the fire didn't work, she had backup plans, including one where Michael took the fall and she inherited everything as his surviving spouse. That realization hit me like a physical blow. Lauren hadn't just been trying to kill me. She'd been positioning herself to betray Michael too. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You can't hide behind lawyers forever. Old woman. Patricia saw me reading it. Double quotes Mrs. Matthews. That's witness intimidation. We can trace that number. Don't bother, I said, already calling my security company. Lauren's out on bond through some connection her lawyer found. I expected this. What do you mean? I smiled grimly. Patricia, I didn't survive 40 years in the tech industry by underestimating people who wanted to destroy me. Lauren thinks she's playing chess while I've been playing three-dimensional chess. She's about to learn the difference, Mrs. Matthews. What aren't you telling me? That I've been recording everything since the day they moved into my house, including several conversations where they discussed backup plans. If their first murder attempt failed, Patricia's eyes widened. You have recordings of them planning contingencies? 3 months worth. Lauren's thorough, I'll give her that. She covered every angle except the possibility that her intended victim was smarter than her would-be killers. Lauren made her first mistake. 12 hours later, my security company called at 3 a.m. to report someone attempting to break into my old house, the one she tried to burn down with me in it. She's been watching the place, Detective Mills explained over the phone. Apparently she hid something there and came back to retrieve it. What kind of something? A second insurance policy. This one for $10 million. Taken out last week under your forged signature. The audacity was breathtaking. Even after arrest, trial, and the possibility of life imprisonment, Lauren was still trying to profit from my death. I arrived at the house to find Lauren in handcuffs, screaming at the officers about police harassment and wrongful arrest. When she saw me, her expression shifted to pure hatred. This isn't over, she snarled. You think you're so smart, but I know things about you that would destroy your precious reputation. Really? I asked, almost conversationally. Do tell. Your precious husband's death wasn't as natural as everyone thinks. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Several officers turned to stare at me. Lauren, I said carefully, David died of pancreatic cancer. There were 4 doctors present, a hospital full of witnesses, and a thoroughly documented medical history. Documented by you. How convenient that he died right after signing his will, leaving everything to you instead of Michael. Detective Mills stepped forward. Mom, are you making an accusation? Lauren's lawyer, who had clearly been dragged out of bed for this fresh disaster, grabbed her arm. Don't say another word, but Lauren was beyond reason now. She poisoned him just like I poisoned her. The only difference is she got away with it. The lawyer's face went white. Several officers exchanged glances, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in 30 years. Genuine fear, not because the accusation was true. David had died, surrounded by medical professionals after a 6-month battle with cancer, but because Lauren had just shown how easily someone could plant doubt about the past when the only witnesses were dead. Detective Mills, I said calmly, I assume you'll want to examine my late husband's medical records, Mrs. Matthews. That won't be necessary, he replied. We have extensive documentation about your husband's illness and death. This appears to be a desperate attempt to create reasonable doubt, But I could see at the small, unsettling seed of uncertainty in a few officers' faces. Lauren had found my weakness. The one person I couldn't protect from her lies was dead, however. Detective Mills continued, Mrs. Patterson, your accusation against Mrs. Matthews has been recorded. If you'd like to make a formal statement, we can arrange that. Lauren's lawyer physically put a hand over her mouth. My client declines to make any further statements as they led her away. She wrenched herself free just long enough to shout, check her medicine cabinet. Check what she keeps in her bedroom. She's not the innocent victim she pretends to be. Back in my car, sitting in the darkness, I tried to process what had just happened. Lauren had crossed a line from attempted murder to attacking the character of a dead man. But she'd also revealed something important. She'd been in my house long enough to go through my personal belongings. I called James immediately. I need you to meet me at my house. Now, Kate. It's 4:00 in the morning, James. Lauren just accused me of murdering David. She also specifically mentioned my medicine cabinet and bedroom. She's been searching my house for something to use against me. 40 minutes later, James and I stood in my bedroom with 2 police officers, going through what Lauren might have been looking for. My medicine cabinet had exactly what you'd expect a 72-year-old woman to have. Blood pressure medication, vitamins, and an old prescription for sleeping pills from after David's death. But in my bedroom safe, we found something that made my blood turn cold. An envelope marked, for Catherine, in case anything happens to me. David inside was a handwritten letter from my husband dated 1 week before he died. Kate, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you're probably grieving. But there are things you need to know about Michael and Lauren. They've been asking questions about my will, about your finances, about what would happen if something happened to both of us. Lauren specifically asked about medication interactions and whether certain drugs could accelerate illness. I didn't tell you because I hoped I was wrong, but if I'm not, please be careful. Our son may not be the man we thought we raised. I sat on my bed, staring at my husband's final warning, and realized that Lauren and Michael's plan had been in motion for over 2 years. They had been plotting this since before David died. Mrs. Matthews, one of the officers said softly, this letter suggests your husband suspected your son and daughter-in-law might pose a threat to you. Yes, I whispered. He tried to warn me from the grave. The trial began on a Monday morning in October with a media circus worthy of P.T. Barnum. Tech billionaire versus killer family. Mother's love turns deadly. The ultimate inheritance battle. I sat in the front row wearing my best black suit, the one I wore to board meetings when I needed to project absolute authority. If a jury was going to decide my son's fate, I wanted them to see exactly who they were dealing with. Michael had lost weight in jail. He looked smaller, somehow diminished in his orange jumpsuit. Lauren, seated at a separate defense table, had chosen the opposite approach, leaning into her youth and supposed vulnerability. In a conservative blue dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, the prosecutor's opening statement was a masterpiece. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about greed so profound that it transformed a son into a would-be killer and a daughter-in-law into a calculating poisoner. The defendants didn't just want Catherine Matthews' money, they wanted her life. Michael's attorney tried the broken family approach. Michael Matthews is a troubled man who lost his way. But wanting your mother's approval and inheritance isn't the same as wanting her dead. Lauren's lawyer went straight for the jugular. My client was manipulated by an older, more sophisticated criminal, Catherine Matthews herself. The evidence will show that Mrs. Matthews has a history of using money to control people. And when that control was threatened, she orchestrated this entire scenario to eliminate threats to her fortune. Interesting. Lauren was setting herself up as my victim rather than Michael's accomplice. The first week of testimony established the core facts: the poisoning, the financial manipulation, the fire. But during cross-examination, Lauren's lawyer revealed his real strategy. Mrs. Matthews, he said, approaching the witness stand with a predatory smile. You recorded conversations with your son without his knowledge, correct? I documented our financial discussions for legal protection. You spied on your own family. I protected myself from people who were stealing from me, stealing or taking what they believed they were entitled to inherit. The prosecutor objected, but the damage was done. He was painting my documentation as paranoia instead of prudence. Mrs. Matthews, he continued, in 30 years, how many times did your son ask you to stop giving him money? I paused, realizing the trap. He never asked me to stop. He never said, Mom, I don't want your help anymore. No, he never said, I want to be independent. No, so he accepted your money willingly. Yes, and in exchange, you expected what? Nothing. You expected no gratitude, no visits, no involvement in family decisions, no say in how the money was spent. Each question felt like a scalpel cutting into me. He was twisting my generosity into manipulation, my love into control. Mrs. Matthews, when your son developed a gambling problem, did you seek professional help for him? I suggested it, but you continued giving him money to pay his debts. Yes. Didn't that enable his addiction? I was trying to protect him, not control him. That night, I sat alone in my hotel room replaying the cross-examination. Lauren's lawyer had done something both brilliant and terrifying. He'd taken my love for my son and reshaped it into something sinister. At 10 p.m., James knocked on my door. Kate, we need to talk about tomorrow's testimony. They're going to make me sound like a monster, aren't they? They're going to try, he said, but we have something they don't expect. He handed me a manila folder. Remember when you had your investigators following Michael and Lauren? They recorded more than just financial meetings. Inside were transcripts of conversations I had never heard. Michael and Lauren. In their car, after visiting me in the hospital. Lauren, she's weaker than I thought. A few more doses and she won't be able to sign her name. Michael, what if someone notices the symptoms? Lauren, who's going to notice? You're her only family and you're helping me dose her. Perfect plan. Michael, I feel sick about this. Lauren, you'll feel sicker if those Atlantic City people kill you for the money you owe. This is survival, not murder. Michael, it is murder. Lauren, no, it's evolution. She's old, she's alone, and she's in our way. This is just nature taking its course with a little help. I stared at the transcripts. James, this conversation happened 3 weeks before the fire. It gets worse. Look at page 4, Lauren's voice. The fire has to look accidental. Make sure the gasoline burns off completely. If there's any residue, we're finished. Michael, what if she wakes up? What if she tries to get out? Lauren, she won't. I gave her double the usual dose tonight. She'll sleep right through it. I set the transcript down, my hands shaking. They were planning to burn me alive while I was unconscious. Kate, James said quietly. This is first-degree murder, premeditated. The death penalty is still on the table. Outside my hotel window, the city sparkled. Families eating dinner, watching TV, living normal lives where sons didn't plot their mother's death. James, I said, play those recordings in court tomorrow. All of them. I want the jury to hear exactly what my loving family thought of me. The courtroom erupted when the recordings played. Michael actually vomited into a trash can when he heard himself planning my murder. Lauren sat stone-faced, calculating, probably trying to figure out whether she could challenge the evidence, or if denial was her only hope. The prosecutor let the recordings speak for themselves, then called the final witness, Dr. Sarah Chen, the toxicologist who examined my blood. Dr. Chen, what level of digitalis did you find in Mrs. Matthews' system? Enough to cause serious cardiac episodes in someone her age. Another few weeks of exposure and she likely would have died of apparent heart failure. Was the poisoning detectable? Not without specific testing. Digitalis mimics age-related cognitive decline and heart problems. Most doctors would have attributed her symptoms to natural aging. In your opinion, was this poisoning sophisticated? Extremely. Someone with pharmaceutical knowledge carefully calibrated the doses to create maximum confusion. While avoiding detection, Lauren's lawyer attacked hard. But Dr. Chen dismantled every attempt to suggest an accident or medical error. Then Michael's attorney made a desperate move. Dr. Chen, is it possible that Mrs. Matthews poisoned herself to frame my client? The question hung in the air like smoke. A few jurors looked at me with fresh suspicion. Counselor, Dr. Chen replied coolly. Are you suggesting a 72-year-old woman poisoned herself for 4 months, documented the evidence, then staged an elaborate arson setup to frame her own son? That level of criminal sophistication is usually seen in sociopaths or master manipulators. So that's your professional opinion? My professional opinion is that the poisoning pattern indicates external administration by someone familiar with pharmaceutical protocols. The victim showed classic signs of unwitting ingestion, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. I could see it on some of the jurors' faces. Were they looking at a victim or a mastermind? During lunch recess, Lauren's attorney approached me in the hallway. Mrs. Matthews, he said calmly, my client is prepared to testify that this entire scenario was orchestrated by you. Really? And how exactly did I orchestrate my own attempted murder? You discovered Michael's gambling debts and decided to eliminate him as an heir. You poisoned yourself to create evidence, then arranged the fire to make him look guilty. The audacity was breathtaking, and my motivation for this elaborate self-destruct would be to protect your fortune from a son you'd come to see as worthless. That afternoon, Lauren took the stand in her own defense. Polished, tearful, and utterly convincing, she portrayed herself as the victim caught between Michael's desperation and my supposed manipulation. I loved Catherine like a mother, she said, dabbing her eyes. But she was controlling, demanding, impossible to please. She held money over our heads constantly. Can you give the jury an example? When Michael wanted to change jobs, she threatened to cut off our support. When we talked about starting a family, she said she wouldn't help with expenses unless we moved closer to her. Everything came with strings attached. And the poisoning? I never poisoned anyone. Catherine had been acting strangely for months, forgetting things, accusing people of stealing from her, paranoid about her food. I think she was having mental health issues and medicated herself. What about the fire? Lauren's composure cracked just slightly. I don't know what happened with the fire. Michael and I were at dinner. We came home and found the police there. It was terrifying. The prosecutor's cross-examination was surgical. Miss Patterson, you testified that you never poisoned Mrs. Matthews. Are you familiar with Digitalis? No, you've never handled Digitalis in your pharmaceutical career? I sold medications. I didn't manufacture them, but you would know how Digitalis affects elderly patients. Yes. I would have basic knowledge, and you would know how to obtain it. Objection. Lauren's lawyer snapped. I'll allow it, Ms. Patterson. You testified that Mrs. Matthews was paranoid and forgetful. Did you encourage her to see a doctor? Yes, several times. But you didn't mention the possibility of poisoning to any medical professional? Why would I? I didn't know she was being poisoned. Yet you had the training to recognize Digitalis poisoning symptoms. Lauren's silence stretched to long thigh. It never occurred to me, never occurred to you, despite your pharmaceutical background, that her symptoms might indicate drug toxicity? Objection sustained, but the damage was done. Her own medical knowledge had turned against her. As court recessed, I watched my son being led back to his cell. He looked broken, defeated, finally understanding the full weight of his choices. Lauren, however, met my eyes as she passed my row. No remorse, no regret, just cold calculation and a clear message that this wasn't over. Tomorrow would bring closing arguments and a verdict that would decide whether my son spent his life in prison or whether his wife's manipulation had succeeded in painting me as the villain. Either way, I had already won the only victory that mattered. I was alive to witness justice. The jury deliberated for 18 hours. I spent that time in my hotel room, staring out at the city where I'd built my fortune and nearly lost my life, trying to make peace with whatever verdict came. James checked in every few hours. They've asked for the recordings to be replayed. They want to review the financial documents. They're asking about the insurance policies. At 3 p.m. on the second day, we got the call. Verdict reached. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, curiosity seekers, people who had followed the case obsessively. I sat in the front row, wearing the same black suit I'd worn every day of the trial, waiting to hear my son's fate. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree against Catherine Matthews, how do you find? Guilty. Michael's shoulders slumped. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, but Michael only stared at me, an expression on his face I couldn't begin to read. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of arson in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. Lauren's verdicts came next. Guilty on every count, plus additional charges for poisoning and fraud. The jury had seen through her manipulation completely. Judge Williams set sentencing for the following week, but the prosecutor's office had already made their intentions clear. They would seek life without parole for both defendants. As the court officer stepped forward to escort Michael back into custody, he turned to me one last time. Mom, he called out across the courtroom. I'm sorry. For the first time in months, I looked at my son and saw the boy I raised, not the man who tried to kill me. But sorry wasn't enough to erase for months of poisoning and attempted murder. I know you are. I called back. But sorry doesn't bring back the mother you threw away when you decided money was worth more than my life. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I did something I hadn't done since the night they were arrested. I cried. Not for Michael or Lauren. They'd made their choices, and now they would live with the consequences. I cried for the family I thought I had, for the love I believed was real, for the 30 years I spent loving people who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. My phone rang. Detective Mills, Mrs. Matthews. I wanted to call personally to tell you that justice was served today, was it? I asked quietly. My son will spend his life in prison. His wife will too. I'm alive, but I'm also alone. I'm not sure anyone really won. Mrs. Matthews, you survived. You fought back. You proved that wisdom and preparation can beat youth and greed. That's victory by any definition. After I hung up, I walked to the window and stared out at the city lights. Tomorrow I would return home to rebuild a life that no longer included the people I had loved most. I had $3 billion. A mind still sharp enough to run circles around people half my age. and the rest of my life to figure out what happiness looks like when it isn't tied to family. The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael and Lauren had tried to steal my fortune by taking my life. Instead, they'd given me the greatest gift imaginable. They'd revealed exactly who they were before it was too late for me to protect myself. 6 months later, I was sitting on the deck of my new house in Santa Barbara, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in gold and red. The house was smaller than my old one, but infinitely more peaceful. No family members plotting my death. No hidden cameras watching my every move. No medication being slipped into my food. Just me, my billions, and a future I finally got to write myself. My neighbor, Eleanor, 75, widowed, and the closest thing I had left to family, brought me a glass of wine and settled into the chair beside me. "Any regrets?" she asked, as she did most evenings. I considered the question seriously. About surviving? Not for a second. About the family I lost? Every day. But then I remember that the family I thought I lost never actually existed. And the money? She asked gently. The money was never the point. Michael could have had every penny if he had simply waited for me to die naturally and treated me with basic human decency in the meantime. Instead, he chose greed over love and lost everything. Do you think he understands that now? I think he understands that actions have consequences. Whether he understands the difference between love and manipulation. I shrugged. That's not my problem anymore. As the sun slipped below the horizon, I raised my glass in a private toast to the woman I'd been forced to become, a survivor, a fighter, and living proof that sometimes the best revenge against people who want you dead is simply refusing to die. Michael and Lauren had wanted to inherit my fortune by removing me from the equation. Instead, they removed themselves and left me with something far more valuable than money: the knowledge that I was strong enough, smart enough, and stubborn enough to outmaneuver anyone who mistook my love for weakness. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.